Debbie Carter stood quietly in the corner of her brother's new apartment, holding a small gift bag. She smiled politely as Jake, her older brother, gave a loud toast to his success and the new life he was building. "Not everyone can afford a 2-bedroom downtown," he joked, making a few relatives laugh. Debbie chuckled softly. If only they knew she lived in a 5-bedroom house in Oak Ridge, fully paid for in cash. But she wasn't the type to correct anyone. She was used to being the quiet one in the family, the introvert who preferred coding to parties and peace over applause. Debbie was 28, a lead software developer for a company that built tools for Fortune 500 clients. Her work paid well, but no one in the family knew that. Unlike Jake, who worked in their dad's car repair business and loved showing off online, Debbie preferred staying in the background. Her world was quiet, lined with code, coffee mugs, and late-night problem-solving. She dressed simply, spoke softly, and never tried to impress. "She's different," her mom once whispered at a family dinner. And Debbie had heard. At family events, Debbie always felt invisible next to Jake. He was charming, loud, and loved by everyone. "You're going places, Jake," relatives would say. Meanwhile, Debbie would sit at the far end of the table, smiling politely and answering questions like, "Do you still live in that tiny apartment?" Or, "Are you eating properly?" She'd nod and let them think what they wanted. She had stopped correcting their assumptions long ago. She remembered one Christmas Eve when Aunt Linda looked at her outfit and said, "You know, Debbie, maybe try dressing up a little. You always look so tired." Debbie had just worked 12 hours fixing a back-end crash for a major client. She smiled and replied, "I'll try next time." But there was no next time. The turning point came at her grandmother's 80th birthday party. Debbie felt obligated to attend. The rented banquet hall was packed with relatives she hadn't seen in years. Everyone buzzed around Jake like he was royalty. Debbie wore a navy dress, stood near the punch table, and pretended to scroll through her phone. Behind her, she overheard someone say, "Poor Debbie. Still single. Still quiet. Wonder if she's okay in the head." That night she decided, no more family events. That night after the party, Debbie sat alone in her apartment with a blanket around her shoulders and a slice of leftover cake on the coffee table. Her phone buzzed with photos from the event. Jake grinning beside their parents, Aunt Linda posing with her daughters, Grandma blowing out candles. Not one included Debbie. She wasn't surprised. She stared at the screen and whispered to herself, "You don't belong there." And for the first time it didn't feel like self-pity. Felt like the truth. The next morning, Debbie made a quiet decision. He stopped going to family events. No more Christmas dinners, no more birthday barbecues, and definitely no more reunions. She kept in touch only with Aunt Margaret, her father's older sister, who had always treated her with kindness. Aunt Margaret called every 2 weeks just to check in. "You know, I made your favorite cherry cobbler," she'd say, showing up at Debbie's apartment with foil-covered dishes and warm hugs. With distance came peace. Debbie spent more time with Tom, her quiet and thoughtful boyfriend who understood her silence and never pressured her to be someone she wasn't. They'd cook simple meals together, play board games, and binge sci-fi shows. On her 28th birthday, a few close friends came over with takeout and laughter. Tom surprised her with a handmade desk organizer for her coding setup. She looked around her tiny apartment and felt content, for the first time in years. The birthday ended with Aunt Margaret dropping by, holding a cake she baked from scratch. "You didn't think I'd forget you, did you?" she said, setting it down beside the candles. They sat on the couch and after a few bites Debbie whispered, "I bought a house." Margaret blinked in surprise. "You what?" Debbie grinned, pulled out her phone and showed pictures of a 5-bedroom house with a porch, garden, and bright white shutters. "It's mine. Please don't tell anyone yet." Margaret leaned back, wiping away a proud tear. "I always knew you were up to something great. Just knew it." Debbie laughed. "It's in Oak Ridge. Quiet neighborhood, decent space for an office. I move in next month." Margaret nodded, her eyes gleaming. "Let them underestimate you. Just promise me one thing. Don't shrink yourself to fit in their small view." Debbie didn't answer right away. She simply looked at the photos of her future home and said, "Not anymore." The day Debbie got the keys, she stood at the entrance of her new home and whispered, "Welcome home, Debbie." The space was perfect. Bright rooms, hardwood floors, and a quiet street with birdsong instead of sirens. She took her time decorating. The master bedroom became her personal sanctuary with soft lighting, calming blue tones, and a reading nook by the window. One of the spare rooms turned into a home office. Another became a cozy guest room. The kitchen, her favorite part, was all clean counters and gleaming appliances. For the first time she cooked meals that weren't microwaved or delivered. Debbie stood in the middle of her kitchen one evening, watching the oven timer and breathing in the smell of roasted vegetables. "Who knew I could make this work?" she laughed, calling Tom on video chat to show off her dish. He grinned. "Look at you, Chef Carter." Her face lit up. "You have to come over next week. I want to cook for you here." Tom nodded. "I'll bring dessert." The house didn't just feel like shelter. It felt like a reward. Even though she preferred quiet, Debbie bought a large dining table with 6 chairs. Just in case, she told herself. Slowly she planned a housewarming party. Not the kind with loud music and 30 guests, but an intimate evening with 10 people she genuinely liked. She invited Tom, her old college roommate Sarah, her work friends Lisa and Mark, and of course Aunt Margaret. She even asked her neighbor across the street, a kind retired teacher named Mr. Holloway, who always waved with a smile. The housewarming night was cozy and joyful. Scented candles flickered in the background, soft music played, and everyone complimented the home. "This place is so you," Sarah said, sipping her lemonade. Aunt Margaret brought her signature casserole and handed Debbie a bouquet. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, and Debbie felt that warmth rise in her chest. It wasn't the kind of praise Jake got in crowded rooms. It was real. Later, after most guests had left, Debbie and Aunt Margaret stayed back to clean. "That was lovely," Margaret said, stacking plates in the sink. Not a single fake smile in the room. Debbie nodded. "That's all I wanted." As they wiped the table, Margaret leaned in and added, "Your mother asks about you, you know." Debbie looked up, surprised. "She doesn't call." Margaret sighed. "She's too proud. But she always wants updates." Debbie looked away. Funny how people only get curious once you disappear. 2 months passed in peaceful silence. Debbie worked from home, kept her garden tidy, and spent weekends with Tom. Then one Tuesday evening her phone buzzed with a name she hadn't seen in over a year. Jake. He stared at the screen. "Jake Carter calling." With hesitation she answered. "Hello." His voice was loud and cheerful. "Debbie. Long time, huh? Listen, I'm having a housewarming this Saturday. You should come. Everyone will be there." Debbie raised an eyebrow. "You inviting me to show off?" Jake laughed. "No. Come on. We're family." That night, Debbie called Aunt Margaret. "Jake invited me to his housewarming," she said flatly. Margaret chuckled. "Let me guess, he still thinks you're in that tiny apartment?" Debbie smirked. "Probably." Margaret grew serious. "You sure you want to go?" Debbie thought for a moment. "Yeah. I want to see what he's so proud of." "Then go in peace," Margaret said. "And wear something that says, 'I'm doing just fine.'" On Saturday, Debbie took her time getting ready. She wore a navy blue jumpsuit with gold earrings and soft curls framing her face. She looked elegant but simple. She picked out a sleek coffee machine as a gift for Jake. It was expensive, functional, and a quiet nod to her own success. As she wrapped it, Tom kissed her cheek. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. Debbie smiled. "I know. But it'll be fun watching their faces." Jake's downtown apartment was packed with family. As Debbie stepped in, heads turned. "Debbie," one cousin said, surprised. "Didn't know you'd come." Aunt Linda gave her a once-over. "Oh, you look different." Debbie simply nodded and smiled. She spotted Aunt Margaret in the corner, who winked at her knowingly. The room buzzed with noise, laughter, and praise, all for Jake, of course. Jake greeted her with open arms. "You made it," he said, clapping her back. "Welcome to the city life." He led her around the apartment, showing off the granite counters, balcony view, and designer furniture. "We've worked hard," he said proudly. "Jessica and I are planning the wedding next summer." Debbie smiled. "Congratulations." Jessica appeared, tall, elegant, dressed in white, and said, "We're so glad you're here, Debbie. Jake talks about you a lot." Debbie almost laughed but didn't. "Thanks," she replied calmly. "Perfect. Here's the next section of your story, from paragraphs 21 to 30, continuing the emotional build-up with plenty of dialogue and consistent tone." Dinner was served buffet style with everyone squeezing around the kitchen island and dining table. Jake stood with a glass of wine and tapped it gently. "Everyone a quick toast," he announced. The room quieted. "To family, hard work and building your future one brick at a time," he began. "Jessica and I have worked tirelessly to get here and we're proud of this new chapter. I hope we inspire others, especially those still figuring things out." His eyes flicked to Debbie. "Don't worry, Deb, your two-bedroom dream is right around the corner." Laughter bubbled across the room. Some chuckled awkwardly. Others smiled too wide. Debbie held her glass still, her face unreadable. Aunt Margaret straightened in her chair. Jake beamed, clearly satisfied with his dig. "It's not easy starting out," he added. "But one step at a time we all get somewhere better." Debbie slowly set her drink down and stood up. "I actually bought a house," Debbie said, her voice even and clear. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Chairs creaked. 5 bedrooms, she added, in Oak Ridge. "I moved in 2 months ago." Someone dropped a fork. Jessica blinked. "Wait. Seriously?" Aunt Linda frowned. "How could you afford that?" Debbie looked at Aunt Margaret, who smiled proudly and pulled out her phone. "Here. These are photos from her housewarming." The phone made its way around the table as relatives gawked at the airy living room, the kitchen island and the manicured backyard. "You did this alone?" Jake asked, brows furrowed. Debbie nodded. "I work as a lead software developer for a tech company. I've been saving and investing for years." The room shifted from surprise to awkward admiration. "So you're like, rich?" someone blurted. Debbie shrugged. "I'm comfortable." More questions came. How big, how much, which bank, what salary? She smiled but didn't answer. "You all assumed I was struggling," she said quietly. "But I just don't broadcast my life like some people." Aunt Margaret reached over and squeezed her hand. Jake looked like he wanted to respond, but instead he reached for his wine again. Debbie's mother leaned forward. "Why didn't you tell us?" Her tone wasn't warm, it was sharp, almost accusatory. Debbie looked at her and replied, "You never asked. You only talked about Jake. You never cared to see me." Her mother's face tightened. "That's not fair." Debbie gave a hollow smile. Neither was being treated like a burden for 28 years. With that she picked up her purse. "I'm going to head out," she said, turning to Aunt Margaret and giving her a brief hug. "Thanks for being the one person who believed in me." As she walked toward the door, Jessica called out, "Debbie, wait. We didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Debbie paused and looked over her shoulder. "It's not discomfort. It's clarity." Then she stepped into the hallway and let the door shut quietly behind her. That night, Debbie ignored the flurry of texts that started pouring in. Messages from cousins she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly lit up her phone. "Didn't know you were doing so well. We should hang out sometime. So proud of you, Deb." Even her mother left voicemails, shifting from confusion to urgency. "Debbie, call me back. We need to talk. Please. This isn't how family should act." Debbie deleted most of the messages without opening them. She only called one person, Aunt Margaret. "I think I set off a bomb," she said. Margaret laughed gently. "Sometimes bombs clear space for something better." Debbie sat in her favorite reading nook with a hot cup of tea. "They'll twist it," she murmured. "They'll say I changed. That I got proud." Margaret replied, "Let them say what they want. You know who you are." The next morning, Debbie woke to a dozen missed calls. Her father, her mother, Jake, even Jessica. They all wanted to talk. She let the phone ring. The peace in her house, the sunlight on the hardwood, the smell of fresh coffee, was too beautiful to ruin. As she sat by her window, her cat curled beside her, she whispered, "I don't owe them anything." But deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning of a storm she had no intention of running from. 3 days later, Debbie finally answered a call. It was her mother. "Debbie," her voice trembled slightly, "we're all a little shocked. You could have shared your news. We want to fix this." Debbie kept her tone calm. "Fix what exactly?" There was a pause. "You've been distant. It hurt to see you just walk out." Debbie scoffed. "I was distant because I was never seen. You didn't hurt when I was invisible, only when I didn't play along." Her mother sighed. "That's not true. We care about you." Debbie didn't hold back. "Then why was I treated like I was broken? Why was Aunt Linda talking about my mental state at Grandma's party? Why did you agree with her? The silence that followed was louder than any shouting. Finally, her mother said, I didn't know how to help you. Debbie replied, I never asked for help. Just respect. The call ended with promises to talk again, but Debbie wasn't counting on it. A week passed quietly. Then on a Sunday afternoon she heard the doorbell. She opened the front door and froze. Her mother, father, Jake and Jessica stood there, smiling awkwardly. We thought we'd drop by, her father said, holding a bag of pastries. We got your address from Margaret. Debbie stayed in the doorway. You didn't ask if you could come. Jessica stepped forward. We just wanted to see the house. It's beautiful. Without waiting for an invitation, Jake wandered in. Wow, this place is huge. How many bedrooms did you say? Debbie clenched her jaw but stayed silent. Her parents walked in behind them, looking around with barely disguised envy. Must have cost a fortune, her dad muttered. Debbie led them to the living room where they sat like they owned the place. It's lovely, Deb, her mother said, stroking a throw pillow. You've done well for yourself. Jake grinned. Bet this place could host some pretty big family dinners. Debbie arched an eyebrow. I don't host people who mock me over dinner. The air tensed. Her mother laughed nervously. Don't be so harsh. Debbie stood up. I'm being honest. Jake exchanged glances with their dad before clearing his throat. Actually, we wanted to talk business. Dad and I are thinking of expanding the shop. Maybe 2 more locations. We thought, maybe you'd want to invest. Debbie blinked slowly. You're asking me to fund your expansion? Jake leaned forward. It's a smart investment. Reliable. Family-based. Debbie laughed. Once dry and sharp. No thanks. Her father frowned. Debbie, come on. We're rebuilding bridges here. She tilted her head. No, you're building a business plan and wrapping it in fake affection. Where was this bridge when I graduated college? Or when I landed my first contract? Or when I spent holidays alone while you gushed over Jake's Instagram? Her mother looked away and Jake's expression soured. Debbie folded her arms. You want my money, not me. Her father's voice grew defensive. That's not true. We're trying to reconnect. No, Debbie said firmly. You're trying to cash in now that I've proven I'm not the family disappointment. She walked to the front door and opened it. Please leave. Jessica stood slowly. Jake, let's go. Her voice held more sense than the rest of them combined. Jake turned as he walked out. Don't expect an invite to our wedding. Debbie smiled coolly. I wouldn't attend even if I got one. Her father grumbled something under his breath. Her mother paused at the door. We're still your family, Debbie. Debbie looked her directly in the eyes. Family doesn't come knocking when there's something to gain. They stay through the silence. She closed the door behind them without waiting for a reply. The next morning, Debbie found herself on the front porch with a cup of tea, the cool breeze brushing against her face. Her phone buzzed again. Aunt Margaret. She answered with a soft smile. They came, didn't they? Margaret asked. Uninvited, Debbie replied. And they left just as fake as they arrived. Margaret chuckled. Well, let them talk. You've built something they can't touch. Peace. Debbie nodded, watching the sunrise. I'm finally home. By the end of the week, Debbie's phone was flooded with screenshots and whispers. A cousin posted online. You never really know who's doing well until they show up in designer heels and shut the room down. Another wrote, some people let money change them. Debbie read them in silence, her expression unmoved. Her family wasn't angry because she'd hidden her success. They were angry she no longer needed them. Aunt Margaret stopped by that weekend with lemon bread and a hug. They're still spinning stories, she said, sitting in Debbie's kitchen. Now they say you were cold, arrogant, maybe even lying. Debbie poured her tea calmly. Let them. I didn't build this life for them. I built it for me. Margaret nodded. Still, it stings. Debbie smiled. Not as much as it used to. Not anymore. At work, Debbie thrived. Her company offered her a remote team lead position, and she began mentoring junior developers. She started hosting low-key brunches with her close friends, Tom, Sarah, Lisa, and Mark, surrounded by laughter and support. Every corner of her house reflected her own choices now. Even her office had a framed note from Aunt Margaret that read, "Grow quietly but never shrink." One evening while reorganizing her bookshelf, Debbie stumbled on an old photo, her, Jake and their parents at a childhood picnic. They all looked happy then, untouched by comparison, judgment, or expectations. She stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into a drawer. That chapter was over. Some things didn't need to stay on display. Jake's wedding came and went. She wasn't invited as expected. She saw filtered photos online. White flowers, long speeches, loud laughter. Jessica looked radiant. Jake beamed. Her mother posted a caption, "Proud of our boy." Debbie turned off her phone, walked to her backyard garden, and watched the breeze move through her tomato plants. "Let them have their show," she whispered. "I have peace." Months passed. Some family members attempted small talk through text. Vague compliments, emojis, and awkward check-ins. Debbie responded politely but never with warmth. They had shown her what she meant to them when they thought she was small. She wouldn't forget it. She had learned that silence wasn't weakness, it was protection. Tom grew closer, spending weekends at the house and helping her renovate the guest room into a shared creative space. "You're different now," he said one morning. "Lighter. Like you're finally breathing right." Debbie looked around her home, her choices, her space, her story. "I stopped trying to earn their love," she said. "Turns out that's when I finally found mine." One Sunday, Debbie hosted a brunch. Her table, the big one she once bought on impulse, was full. Friends clinked glasses. Aunt Margaret told a story that had everyone in tears from laughing. Debbie stood for a moment at the kitchen archway looking at her people. Chosen, steady, real. They weren't family by blood, but they had never made her feel less than enough. As the guests left and the sun dipped low, Debbie walked through her house barefoot, letting the silence settle. She picked up a framed photo from the housewarming party, her smiling with Aunt Margaret and Tom, and set it by the living room window. Then she curled onto the couch, blanket in hand, and whispered to herself, "I didn't need to prove anything. I just needed to be seen by the right people." Moral lesson. Sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness, but true strength is found in knowing your worth, walking away from those who overlook you, and building a life that doesn't need their validation.